I could never have imagined that my life would come to this. I wasn't the type to notice the little things, at least not in the beginning. Laura and I had been married for 6 years, and in that time, she had always been consistent, warm, affectionate, and attentive. But over the past few months, something about her seemed different. At first, I chalked it up to stress, maybe work getting to her. But as the days wore on, the small changes piled up. Her laugh became sharper, her smiles more distant. Even her touch, once soft and comforting, felt more like an obligation than a genuine expression of love. We hadn't been intimate in a while, and whenever I brought it up, she dismissed it with excuses. "I'm just tired," she'd say. "Maybe later." But later never came. Laura was always tired these days, always distracted, always somewhere else. I tried not to read too much into it. Relationships went through phases, right? But then there were the late nights. The nights where she'd leave the house under the pretense of seeing friends or working late. At first, I believed her because there wasn't a reason not to. Laura had never given me a reason to doubt her. She'd been my rock, my partner in everything. But the late nights turned into weekends, and the distance between us grew until it was undeniable. I remember the day that first red flag planted itself firmly in my gut. It was a Thursday, and Laura had come home late again, a bit more dressed up than usual. When I asked her how her night was, she shrugged and mumbled something vague about a work dinner. But I knew it wasn't true. There was a coldness in her response that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a lie. It was the way she said it, as if she didn't care whether I believed her or not. That was when the suspicion took root. I started noticing other things. Her phone was constantly buzzing with messages, but she'd always tilt the screen away or quickly pocket it when I was near. Her laughter, once genuine, had taken on a different quality, one that wasn't meant for me. She was more careful with her computer, too. I would catch glimpses of her quickly closing windows when I entered the room, her fingers hovering over the keyboard with a nervous energy. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. Laura had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, and curiosity, mixed with a growing sense of dread, got the better of me. My hands shook as I opened her laptop, wondering if I was about to find what I feared the most. I found nothing at first: emails, Word documents, and spreadsheets. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then I stumbled upon a folder buried deep within the drive. It was innocuously named, something generic like documents or work. My gut screamed at me to click it, and when I did, I found a series of videos. Most of them seemed harmless, but one was marked with a date from a few weeks ago, a time when she told me she was at a friend's birthday party. I clicked play, and my world shattered. It wasn't just a video. It was them. Her and some man I'd never seen before. They were in a park, laughing and smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. It was the kind of carefree, genuine happiness that I hadn't seen from her in months. And it was for him, not me. They were sitting close, their hands brushing casually but intimately, and there was no mistaking the look in her eyes. She was in love with him. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred as anger and pain clawed at my chest. I paused the video, not wanting to see more, but the damage was done. That single moment, that single smile, was enough to confirm what I had been desperately trying to avoid. Laura was cheating on me. I closed the laptop and stumbled back, the world around me spinning. I couldn't focus. I couldn't think straight. I didn't know what to do with the surge of emotions that coursed through me: betrayal, anger, humiliation. This woman, the one I had built my life with, was living a lie that I had unknowingly been a part of. But that wasn't even the worst of it. No! The worst was yet to come. I don't know why I kept digging. Maybe I was hoping that somehow there would be an explanation, something that would make it all less horrible. But what I found next tore away any last shred of doubt. Buried even deeper in the same folder was another video. This one was titled simply with initials L and M. I opened it and my heart stopped. It was again. But this time there was no park, no laughter. Just a bed that wasn't ours. Laura was in it with him. Their movements were slow at first, deliberate, but it didn't take long for things to escalate. I couldn't look away. It was like watching a car crash, knowing you shouldn't, but unable to stop yourself. Every second burned into my brain, the sounds, the movements, the way she looked at him, everything. It wasn't just sex. It was something deeper, something that she had taken from me and given to him. I slammed the laptop shut, my chest heaving as bile rose in my throat. I stumbled into the bathroom, my body convulsing as I dry heaved into the sink, but nothing came up. Just the hollow, gut-wrenching reality that my marriage was over. I stood there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the mirror, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. What had I done? What had I missed? How had I become so blind? But I couldn't stay numb for long. Fury took over, blinding, uncontrollable rage. I stormed back into the living room, knocking over everything in my path. I wanted to break something, to destroy everything just like she had destroyed me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. After the initial shock of that video, I barely slept. The image of Laura with him replayed in my mind over and over. My emotions swung between disbelief and fury. How could she do this to me, to us? Our marriage had its ups and downs like any other, but I thought we were solid. I never thought I'd be the husband who had to deal with something like this. But here I was, on the verge of losing everything I thought was real. By morning, the fury had settled into a cold determination. My thoughts were clearer, sharper. I couldn't sit back and let this happen. I couldn't confront her without more. What if she twisted the narrative, claimed it was a misunderstanding? She was smart like that, could turn things around, make me the crazy one. No, I needed to see everything with my own eyes, and I knew exactly how to get it. I decided I was going to follow her. I'd been too trusting, too blind, but not anymore. I needed to know every detail, where she was going, who she was with, what she was doing. I needed to catch her in the act, confront her with no way for her to lie or manipulate her way out. Laura had always been methodical, so it wasn't hard to figure out her routine. She usually left the house around 6 p.m., claiming she had yoga or was meeting up with friends. She'd get all dolled up, which always seemed excessive for something as simple as a yoga class, but I never questioned it, until now. She'd grab her bag and leave, her phone always tucked tightly in her hand, her face a mask of calm confidence, as if she had everything under control. But today was different. Today, I wasn't the clueless, trusting husband. I was watching her closely. Around 5:30 p.m., she was in the bedroom, getting ready. I stood in the hallway, listening as the sound of the blow dryer filled the space. She was humming a soft tune to herself, the same song she used to sing when we were happy. That sound twisted the knife deeper into my chest. She was living two lives. The cheerful, carefree wife she pretended to be when she was with me, and the other woman, the one who snuck off to meet her lover. It was infuriating how easily she seemed to slip between those personas. She came downstairs, dressed casually enough to pass for a night out with friends. Jeans, a nice top, nothing too flashy. But I knew her well enough to spot the little details. The subtle touch of perfume, the extra attention she'd given to her hair. Her outfit might have looked casual, but she was dressing to impress someone. And it wasn't me. "I'll be back around 9, she said, barely glancing in my direction as she grabbed her purse. I forced a smile, one that barely reached my eyes. "Have fun," I replied, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did and just didn't care. Once the door clicked shut behind her, I moved quickly. I had already parked my car down the street, knowing that if I pulled out of the driveway behind her, she'd be suspicious. I grabbed my jacket and slipped out the back, making my way to my car. My heart raced, the adrenaline pumping through my veins. This was it. I was going to follow her, find out where she was going, who she was meeting. No more guessing, no more assumptions. Tonight, I'd know everything, from a safe distance. I watched as she drove off, her taillights disappearing down the road. I waited a moment, giving her enough time to feel secure in the illusion that her lies were safe. Then I pulled onto the road, careful to stay far enough behind so she wouldn't spot me. As I followed her, my mind raced with scenarios. Was she meeting him at some cheap motel? Did they have a favorite spot, some place I knew nothing about? Or was she brazen enough to take him to our own bed when I wasn't around? The questions burned inside me, each one worse than the last. She drove out of our neighborhood and headed toward the city, taking back roads I didn't usually associate with her usual haunts. That in itself raised a red flag. Why was she avoiding the main streets? It was as if she knew she had to keep her movements hidden, even if subconsciously. She was sneaky, very sneaky. The car in front of me slowed as she approached a small, secluded restaurant on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place where no one would recognize you, quiet and dimly lit. It wasn't one of those trendy spots we used to go to as a couple. No, this was a place where people went when they didn't want to be seen. She parked her car around the side, near the back entrance, and I pulled into a lot a few blocks down, parking where I had a clear view of the entrance but wouldn't be noticed. I waited, my breath shallow as I watched her walk toward the door. And then, just as I had feared, a man stepped out from the shadows, greeting her with a smile. Him, the same man from the video. He was tall, athletic, with that same smug, self-assured grin I'd seen on my screen. Laura's body language told me everything. She was at ease with him, comfortable. Too comfortable. She leaned in close, touching his arm as they exchanged a few words before heading inside. I gripped the steering wheel, the leather creaking beneath my fingers as I fought the urge to storm out of the car and confront him right then and there. But I couldn't. Not yet. If I did, she'd have an excuse, a way to worm her way out of it. I needed something more, something undeniable. So I stayed put, watching as they disappeared into the restaurant. I knew I couldn't follow them inside without drawing attention, so I waited. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. Time dragged on, every second stretching painfully. They were in there, laughing, probably planning their next betrayal, while I sat in my car, waiting like a fool. After what felt like hours, the door finally opened. Laura and her lover stepped out, still laughing, their arms brushing against each other with a familiarity that twisted my stomach. I snapped a few photos from the car, each one a nail in the coffin of our marriage. I watched as they walked back to their cars, pausing briefly by us before she leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't a casual peck. It was deep, passionate, something she hadn't given me in months. The sight of it sent a surge of rage through me, but I held it back. Not yet. I reminded myself. I had to be patient. I followed them again, this time with more caution. He was taking her somewhere, and I needed to know where. They drove for about 20 minutes, weaving through side streets and quiet neighborhoods until they pulled up to an apartment complex. His apartment, I assumed. He parked, and she followed him inside, her hand in his, like they didn't have a care in the world. I sat in my car, staring at the entrance where they had disappeared. There it was, the proof I needed. She wasn't just cheating. She was fully involved with this man, and she didn't even care that I might find out. The anger I had been holding back erupted inside me, but I forced myself to think clearly. This wasn't the moment to confront them. I had to play this smart. I couldn't believe the woman I married had become this person. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. It was like she decided that our marriage didn't matter, that I didn't matter. But if she thought I was going to just let this slide, she was dead wrong. Sitting outside that apartment complex, watching as my wife disappeared inside with him, the full weight of her betrayal finally hit me. She had crossed a line that I couldn't ignore. My heart pounded, my breath quickened, and the fury that had simmered under the surface for weeks was now threatening to consume me. I wanted to storm inside, kick down the door, and tear that smug bastard apart with my bare hands. But that wouldn't give me what I needed. I didn't want her lies. I didn't want her excuses. I wanted her to pay. The apartment was in one of those bland complexes with no distinguishing features, the kind that you could pass 100 times and never notice. It suited their affair perfectly. Unremarkable, hidden, and anonymous. From where I sat, I had a clear view of the front door and the parking lot. I couldn't follow them inside without raising suspicion, so I settled in to wait. I didn't know how long they'd be, but I had nothing but time. I replayed everything in my mind, the moments, the little signs, all the things I'd missed. It was so obvious now, looking back, how she had slowly distanced herself. I hadn't wanted to see it. Love had blinded me. And now, all that love had turned to ash. The anger was easier to hold on to. It was clean burning and fueled my need for revenge. But beneath it all, there was this raw, aching emptiness that I couldn't ignore. A part of me still couldn't believe it was real. That Laura, the woman I'd trusted with everything, could betray me like this. Hours passed, and eventually I saw movement. The front door opened, and Laura stepped out with that same smug grin on her face. She looked carefree, completely unaware that her little secret was crumbling around her. The man followed behind, his hand brushing hers as they walked to their cars. They didn't kiss this time. Maybe they thought it was too risky out in the open, but the intimacy was there. She didn't even look guilty. I snapped a few more photos from the car. This wasn't just about her now. I had a plan forming, something that would cut deeper than just confronting her. I was going to expose them both, but first, I needed to know who this guy really was. He wasn't just some random fling. There was something about the way they were together, the comfort, the ease. This had been going on for a long time. It wasn't a fling. It was a relationship, and that made it worse. They both got into their cars, and I decided to follow him this time. I already knew Laura's routine, her excuses. Now I needed to learn his. I let her drive off first, and when she was out of sight, I tailed him. He drove slowly, casually, like a man without a care in the world. If he only knew how close he was to everything crashing down. His route was familiar. Too familiar. After about 20 minutes, he turned into a quiet suburban neighborhood and parked in front of a modest, 2-story house. I drove past, my mind racing. That house, it wasn't an apartment or a bachelor pad. It was a home. His home. Was he married too? Did he have kids? I couldn't believe it, but the evidence was right in front of me. I circled back, parking down the street where I had a clear view of the house. The lights inside were on, and after a few minutes, I saw him walk inside and greet someone, a woman. She was dressed casually, probably his wife. My stomach churned as I watched the scene unfold. He was living a double life too, just like Laura. The hypocrisy of it all made my blood boil. He had a wife, a home, a life that he'd built, and yet he had no problem sneaking around behind her back to sleep with mine. I clenched my fists, barely containing the rage that surged through me. This man had no idea how much damage he'd caused. And soon, his world was going to come crashing down, just like mine had. I needed to act quickly. I pulled out my phone and did a reverse search of his license plate. It didn't take long to find his name, Michael Walker. I scrolled through public records, piecing together his life. He was married, just as I suspected, with 2 kids. A family man on the surface, but underneath, a cheating bastard who thought he could get away with destroying someone else's marriage while maintaining his own. I sat there for a long time, staring at his house, the weight of everything crashing down on me. It wasn't just about Laura anymore. It was about him, too. I wasn't going to let him off the hook. He was as much a part of this betrayal as she was. If anything, he was worse. A plan began to form in my mind, sharp and clear. I couldn't just confront them and hope for a clean resolution. That wasn't enough. They needed to feel what I felt. The betrayal, the humiliation, the rage. And I knew exactly where to start. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd found during my digging. It rang a few times before a woman's voice answered, tired but polite. "Hello." "Hi," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Is this Mrs. Walker?" There was a pause. Yes, who is this? My name's Mark, I said, leaning forward, the weight of the moment heavy in my chest. I'm sorry to be calling you like this, but I think you need to know something. It's about your husband. Another long silence. What about him? I think he's having an affair with my wife. Her sharp intake of breath told me I had her attention. What are you talking about? I know it's a lot to take in, I said, keeping my tone calm, almost too calm given the storm of emotions inside me. But I've been following him, and I have proof. I've seen them together. I have photos, videos. I'm sorry, but you need to see this. She didn't say anything for a moment, and I could almost hear her mind racing, trying to make sense of what I was telling her. Finally, her voice came out shaky, barely above a whisper. Where can we meet? Somewhere private, I said. I don't want him to know what's happening yet. He has no idea I've been following them. If we're smart about this, we can catch them together and you'll have all the proof you need. We agreed to meet at a nearby coffee shop, and I hung up, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the first step in my revenge. I wasn't just going to confront Laura. I was going to expose her. I wanted her to feel the same gut-wrenching betrayal I felt. But more than that, I wanted Michael to lose everything too. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Mrs. Walker was already there, sitting in a corner booth, her face pale and drawn. She looked nervous, like she was on the verge of breaking down. As I sat down, I could see the worry in her eyes, the fear of what I was about to tell her. I didn't waste time. I showed her the photos, the videos, everything I had gathered over the past few days. She stared at the screen, her hands trembling as she watched her husband with my wife, the realization sinking in. "Oh my God," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. How long has this been going on?" "I don't know for sure," I admitted, my voice low. "But from what I've gathered, it's been at least a few months, maybe longer." She sat back, her face pale, her breath shaky as she processed the weight of it all. I could see the pain, the shock, the anger, all the emotions I had gone through in the last few days. But then, something changed. The look in her eyes hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "They deserve to pay," she said, her voice steady, cold. "Both of them." I nodded. "They do, and we're going to make sure they do." We spent the next hour laying out a plan, one that would destroy them both. It wasn't just about exposing the affair anymore. It was about making sure they lost everything. Their relationship, their reputations, everything they had tried to hide. By the time we were done, there was no turning back. My mind raced as I drove home after meeting Mrs. Walker. The plan was set. She had been as furious as I was, maybe even more. The pain in her eyes, the anger in her voice as she stared at those photos, it mirrored my own emotions perfectly. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about justice, revenge. Laura and Michael thought they could go on living their double lives, thinking we'd never find out. But they had no idea what was coming for them. I parked a block away from the house, sitting in the car for a long time, staring at the front door. My hands clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The anger surged inside me, but underneath it was a strange calmness. This was the eye of the storm, and I knew it wouldn't be long before everything exploded. But for the first time since discovering Laura's affair, I felt like I had control. When I finally stepped inside, the house was quiet, dark except for the faint glow of the TV in the living room. Laura was on the couch, her laptop perched on her legs. She barely looked up when I entered, her focus fixed on the screen. She'd been doing that a lot lately, retreating into her own world, ignoring me, as if I was just background noise. But tonight, it didn't bother me. Tonight, I had the upper hand. "Hey," she said, not even bothering to glance away from the screen. "Hey," I replied, forcing my voice to sound normal. I couldn't let her know I was on to her, not yet. Not until everything was ready. "Busy night." She nodded absently. "Yeah, catching up on some work. Of course, always with the excuses, always hiding behind her laptop or phone. I clenched my jaw, the anger threatening to rise, but I kept it under control. Soon, I reminded myself, soon, I'd confront her with everything, and she'd have nowhere to run. "I'm going to bed," I said, turning toward the stairs. "You coming up soon?" "In a bit," she mumbled, still glued to her screen. I didn't bother to say anything more. I climbed the stairs, my thoughts sharp and focused on the next step. Tomorrow, everything would be set in motion. Mrs. Walker and I had agreed to make our move when we had both Michael and Laura cornered. No room for excuses or denials. As I lay in bed, my mind raced with thoughts of the confrontation, the images of Laura with Michael, the lies she'd told me, the way she'd slipped away night after night without a second thought. All of it replayed over and over in my head. The anger kept me awake for hours, but I didn't mind. I was ready. Tomorrow, she'd face everything. The next day dragged on painfully slow. Laura left for work like it was any other day, kissing me on the cheek with that same fake smile she'd been using for months. I watched her walk out the door, her face calm, completely unaware that her entire world was about to fall apart. She thought she had me fooled, that I was still the clueless husband who wouldn't question a thing. But not today. Today, everything was going to change. Around noon, I spoke with Mrs. Walker again. I sent her the final pieces of evidence, the photos from last night, the videos. We agreed it was time to act. She would confront Michael tonight, and I would confront Laura. But we weren't just planning a private confrontation. We wanted it to be public. They would have nowhere to hide. That afternoon, I made the final arrangements. Mrs. Walker and I had discussed everything down to the last detail. We weren't going to let them weasel out of this. I'd never been so sure about anything in my life. This wasn't just about confronting Laura. It was about making her feel the same humiliation, the same betrayal that I had felt. Later that evening, I told Laura I had something special planned, a surprise for her. She looked at me, a flicker of suspicion crossing her face, but she didn't question it. Why would she? She had no idea that I knew everything. No idea that I had already spoken to Michael's wife and planned their downfall. "Where are we going?" she asked, adjusting her makeup in the mirror as I drove. "You'll see," I said, keeping my voice casual. Inside, I was anything but calm. "It's a surprise." I could sense her curiosity, maybe even a little wariness, but she played along. Why wouldn't she? I had never given her a reason to doubt me. I was the trusting husband, the one who had never once questioned her sudden late nights or her constant excuses. But not tonight. Tonight, she would see exactly how much I knew. We pulled up to Michael's house, and I could feel the tension in the air as I parked the car. Laura looked at me, her brow furrowed. "Why are we here?" I got out of the car without answering, my heart pounding, adrenaline surging through my veins. "Get out. We're going inside." "Frank, what is this?" Laura's voice was sharp now, laced with confusion, but there was something else there, fear. I ignored her, walking straight up to the front door. Mrs. Walker was already there, waiting by the entrance, her face pale but resolute. Laura followed behind me, her confusion growing with each step. She didn't know what was happening yet, but she could sense it, the calm before the storm. "What the hell is going on?" Laura demanded, her voice rising in panic. I didn't respond. I knocked on the door, and a few moments later, Michael opened it. His face dropped when he saw me. Panic flashed in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with a fake smile. "Frank, what are you doing here?" I didn't move, didn't blink. "We need to talk." His eyes darted to Laura, and I saw the fear in them. He knew. Laura knew too, though she wasn't fully aware of just how bad things were yet. Mrs. Walker stepped forward, her voice trembling with anger. "It's over, Michael." Laura's confusion turned to horror as she realized the scope of what was happening. She turned to me, her eyes wide. "Frank, What is this? What are you talking about? I felt a dark satisfaction settle in as I stared at her. You think I didn't know? I said, my voice calm but laced with venom. You think I didn't see what you've been doing? Michael took a step back, raising his hands defensively. Frank, this isn't what you think. I held up my phone, showing Laura and Michael the photos I'd taken, the videos I had found. Laura's face went white as she saw the evidence. Michael's hands dropped to his sides, defeated. I know everything, I said, disgust in my voice. And you're both going to pay for it. Laura opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off, my voice rising. You were cheating on me with him. I spat, pointing at Michael. You thought I wouldn't find out? You thought I was too stupid to notice. Her face crumpled, but it wasn't guilt I saw her eyes. It was anger. You went through my stuff? She hissed. You spied on me? You lied to me for months. I shouted, my voice cracking. You threw away our marriage for this? Michael tried to intervene, but Mrs. Walker stepped in, her voice shaking with fury. You think you can just destroy our families and walk away like nothing happened? We know everything. Laura crossed her arms, her face hardening. So what? You're going to ruin us? Embarrass us? I stepped closer to her, my voice low, controlled. Oh, it's going to be more than that, Laura. We're going to make sure everyone knows exactly who you both are. For the first time, real fear crossed Laura's face. But I wasn't finished. I turned to Mrs. Walker. Let's show them what happens when you mess with the wrong people. Without a word, I grabbed Mrs. Walker's hand and led her inside. We walked past Michael, who stood frozen in shock, and headed straight for the bedroom. Laura's scream echoed behind us, but I didn't care anymore. The betrayal, the lies, the humiliation, it all came flooding out. And that night, we made sure Laura and Michael would never forget what we did. The silence that followed after what I had done was deafening. I stood by the door, the weight of everything crashing over me. Laura sat on the bed, her face pale, eyes wide with shock. Michael was frozen in place, unable to process what he had just walked in on. The entire room seemed to vibrate with the tension, like the air itself was holding its breath. For a moment, no one said anything. My heart pounded so hard in my chest, I thought it would explode. I could hear Mrs. Walker breathing heavily beside me, her hand still gripping mine. Both of us standing there defiant. There was no turning back now. The line had been crossed, and I didn't regret a single thing. Finally, Laura's voice broke the silence, shaky and edged with fury. Frank, how could you? Her eyes flicked from me to Mrs. Walker, a mix of horror and disbelief. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed back onto the bed, hands shaking. How could I? I echoed, my voice cold. I stepped closer, the anger bubbling up again, stronger than before. You cheated on me. You lied. You threw our marriage away for him. I pointed at Michael, who hadn't moved, his face drained of all color. Michael finally snapped out of his daze, stepping toward me, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. Frank, what the hell did you just do? I didn't back down. I did what you deserve. You think you can waltz into my life, destroy my marriage, and walk away without consequences? You ruined everything. And now, you've lost everything too. He lunged at me, his fist clenched, but before he could make contact, I shoved him back hard. Don't even think about it, Michael. You've already crossed too many lines. Frank, stop! Laura screamed, her voice cracking, but I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't the guilt of someone who was sorry. It was the anger of someone who had lost control of the situation. Her lie had finally unraveled, and she had no idea how to piece it back together. Mrs. Walker, who had been standing quietly beside me, stepped forward now. Her voice was quiet but deadly. You thought you could keep this secret, didn't you, Michael? You thought you could just sneak around behind my back and behind Frank's, and we'd never know. But you're wrong. You're both going to pay. Laura's face contorted with rage. her voice dripping with venom. "You too think this makes you better than us? You're disgusting." She turned to me, eyes blazing. You had sex with her in front of me. How could you stoop that low?" I didn't flinch. "I did it to show you how it feels, Laura. How it feels to be betrayed, to be humiliated. You and Michael destroyed our lives, and you think you can just get away with it." "This was never supposed to happen," Laura shouted, her voice breaking, the first trace of something vulnerable creeping through. "I didn't." "Didn't what?" I interrupted. "Didn't mean to get caught. Didn't mean for it to go on this long. You didn't mean for any of this. But you made your choices, Laura. You chose to cheat. You chose to lie to me. And now you have to live with the consequences." Her eyes flickered with something else then, fear, but also defiance. "You were never enough for me, Frank," she said, her voice quieter now, laced with cruelty. "That's why this happened. You weren't enough. And he," she gestured toward Michael, "was." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had expected excuses, denials, maybe even apologies. But this cold admission, it cut deeper than anything else she could have said. "You really don't feel anything, do you?" I asked, my voice raw, barely above a whisper. She stared at me, her face hard, emotionless. "I haven't loved you in years. You were just easy. I was waiting for the right moment to tell you." I staggered back as if I had been slapped. The woman I had loved for years, who I had given everything to, was looking at me like I was nothing, just some convenience she had kept around until she was ready to throw me away. Mrs. Walker stepped forward again, her eyes fixed on Michael, who hadn't said a word since trying to confront me. "And you, Michael? What about us? Did we mean anything to you?" Michael's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. His silence spoke louder than any words could have. He couldn't deny it. He couldn't fight what he had done. But the worst part was, I realized now, neither of them even cared. This wasn't about love or regret or even guilt. Laura and Michael didn't care about the destruction they had caused. They didn't care about the lives they had shattered. And that realization only fueled my rage. "You deserve each other," I spat, my voice trembling. "But don't think you're walking away from this. You're both going to lose everything. I'll make sure of it." Mrs. Walker nodded, her voice calm but resolute. "We've already sent the evidence to everyone who matters. Your friends, your family, your workplaces. It's over. You can't hide anymore." Michael's face twisted with panic. "What? You can't." "We already did. I cut in. By now, everyone knows what you've been doing. Your perfect little lives are about to fall apart." Laura's face paled as the weight of what we had done sank in. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Her arrogance, her defiance. It was gone, replaced by something closer to dread. "You have no right," she started, but I didn't let her finish. "You had no right to destroy our marriage." I shot back. "You had no right to lie to me, to betray me. Now, you're going to face the consequences." I turned to leave, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands still shaking from the adrenaline. Mrs. Walker followed close behind, neither of us saying a word as we stepped out of the house, leaving Laura and Michael behind, their worlds crumbling. As the door slammed shut behind us, a wave of exhaustion hit me. The rush of anger and adrenaline began to fade, leaving me feeling hollow, empty. We had done it, gotten our revenge, exposed their lives for the world to see. But as I walked away, a part of me wondered if it had been enough. If anything would ever be enough to erase the pain of what they had done. We stood by my car, the night air cool and still. Mrs. Walker looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions, satisfaction, sadness, relief. "What now?" she asked quietly. I shook my head, staring at the ground. "I don't know." For the first time since this whole mess had begun, I didn't know what to feel. The rage that had driven me for so long was gone, replaced by an emptiness I hadn't expected. Revenge wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. It hadn't fixed anything. I was still broken. But at least now, I wasn't alone. The drive back home was silent, thick with the weight of everything that had just happened. Mrs. Walker sat in the passenger seat, staring out of the window, lost in her own thoughts. The adrenaline had drained from both of us, leaving only exhaustion in its place. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white, as my mind replayed the events over and over. We had done it. The plan had worked perfectly. Laura and Michael were exposed for the liars they were. But despite everything, the satisfaction I had anticipated felt hollow. When I pulled into my driveway, I turned off the engine but didn't move. For a long moment, we both just sat there, the quiet between us broken only by the faint sounds of the night outside. Mrs. Walker finally broke the silence. "I don't know if I feel better," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I would." I sighed, leaning back in the seat, staring at the ceiling of the car. Yeah, me too. For months, all I had thought about was revenge. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal. It had consumed me. And now that it was done, now that I had confronted Laura and seen the look of shock and fear in her eyes, I realized that nothing could erase the damage that had been done. Nothing could fix the gaping hole inside me. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She looked over at me, her eyes red and tired. "I've spent so much time planning this, and now that it's over, I feel like I'm still in the same place, still broken." I didn't have an answer for her. I felt the same way. All the rage and revenge in the world hadn't changed the fact that my wife had cheated on me, that she had betrayed everything we had built together. I could destroy her reputation, make her lose everything, but it wouldn't undo the fact that she had already thrown our marriage away. "You're not alone," I said, finally looking at her. "We both did what we thought we had to do, but you're right, it doesn't fix anything." She nodded, her expression distant. "I should probably go home, figure out what's next." I didn't try to stop her. She opened the door, stepped out, and stood by the car for a moment before turning back to me. I don't know if I can ever really forgive him, or myself for not seeing it sooner." I met her gaze and offered a sad smile. "Neither can I." With that, she walked away into the night, her figure slowly disappearing into the darkness. I watched her go, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. I had won, but at the same time I had lost. I walked inside, the house feeling emptier than ever. The silence was unbearable. The rooms too large, too still. The memories of Laura were everywhere. The photos on the walls, the furniture we had picked out together, even the scent of her perfume still lingered faintly in the air. It was all a reminder of what we had once had and what she had destroyed. I collapsed onto the couch, my mind a blur. It wasn't just a betrayal that hurt. It was a loss of trust, the realization that everything I had believed in was a lie. The woman I had married, the life we had built, it was all gone, shattered by her affair. And even though I had exposed her, even though I had gotten my revenge, the emptiness inside me remained. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at the wall, my thoughts spiraling. At some point, my phone buzzed on the table, pulling me out of the fog. I glanced at the screen and saw a text from Laura. "We need to talk." I stared at the message, my heart heavy. I wasn't sure if I could handle talking to her, not after everything, but I knew it was inevitable. Sooner or later, we'd have to face each other again. I had to hear what she had to say, even if I already knew there was no coming back from this. Without replying, I stood up and walked into the bedroom. It was the one place that felt the heaviest, the place where I had first discovered her betrayal, the place where I had replayed every conversation, every lie, trying to figure out when it had all gone wrong. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing with thoughts of what she might say. Would she try to apologize? Would she finally admit to everything? Part of me wanted her to beg for forgiveness, to break down and show some sign that she regretted what she had done. But a larger part of me knew that even if she did, it wouldn't matter. I couldn't unsee the things I had seen. I couldn't undo the damage. About an hour later, I heard the front door open and close softly. Laura had let herself in. I stayed where I was, not moving, waiting for her to come upstairs. The footsteps on the stairs were slow and hesitant, like she knew the gravity of what was about to happen. She stepped into the bedroom, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked at me for a long time, standing awkwardly by the door as if she didn't know what to say or where to begin. "I'm sorry, Frank," she finally said, her voice cracking. "I never meant for this to happen." I stared at her, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. "You never meant for it to happen? You cheated on me for months, Laura. You lied to me." Tears filled her eyes as she tried to step closer, but I held up my hand to stop her. "Don't. Just don't." She bit her lip, her face crumpling as the tears fell. "I know I messed up. I know I ruined everything. But I wasn't happy anymore." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I couldn't muster the energy to argue. I had heard enough excuses. "You could have told me that before sleeping with him, before lying to me every day." "I didn't know how to tell you," she whispered, sinking down to the floor, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I didn't know how to leave." I stood up, the numbness settling deeper into my bones. "You didn't have to leave. You just had to be honest. But you couldn't do that, could you?" She cried harder, her hands covering her face. But I didn't move to comfort her. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to feel. My love for her, the trust we had once shared, had withered away. "I loved you," I said quietly, my voice breaking. "I loved you more than anything, and you threw it all away." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. I know, and I'm sorry. I wish I could take it back, but I can't." I stared at her, the woman I had once thought I'd spend my life with, now a stranger. "It's too late for sorry, Laura. I'm done." Her face crumpled again, but this time I turned away. I couldn't watch her fall apart. I couldn't watch her beg for forgiveness that I couldn't give. As I left the room, the weight of finality settled over me. I was walking away from the woman I had built my life with, but there was no other choice. Betrayal leaves wounds too deep to heal, and no amount of tears or apologies could undo what she had done. Weeks passed. Life moved on, as it always does, but nothing felt the same. I filed for divorce, and Laura didn't fight it. She left the house, leaving me alone with the memories of a life we had once shared. I thought about Michael and Mrs. Walker often, wondering how their lives were unraveling in the aftermath of the confrontation. The public fallout had been brutal. Word had spread quickly. Our friends, family, co-workers, everyone knew what had happened. There was no escaping the whispers, the judgment. Laura lost her job, and Michael's marriage disintegrated as swiftly as ours had. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a drink in my hand, I thought about everything that had happened. The revenge, the confrontation, the pain. I had wanted to destroy them both, and I had succeeded. But now, sitting here in the quiet, I realized that revenge wasn't as fulfilling as I had imagined. I had hurt them, yes, but the emptiness was still there. I took a sip of my drink and stared out into the night. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace. I was free from the lies, free from the betrayal. The wounds were still there, but they would heal with time. And as I sat there, the silence no longer felt suffocating. It felt like the beginning of something new.